Why were they staring at her like that? The helicopter blades carved through Afghan air. Thick, heavy, unforgiving. Dr. Sarah Chen adjusted her headset for the third time. 8 months in this desert. 8 months of blood and dust and the weight of lives slipping through her fingers. The rhythm had become second nature. Another call, another battlefield, another chance to pull someone back from the edge. 2 minutes out, the pilot's voice crackled. Flat, professional, but she heard it anyway, that slight tension. Multiple casualties, IED blast, Navy SEALs. Her stomach tightened. SEALs meant something different. These weren't regular soldiers who stumbled into danger. These were men who walked toward it, who lived in places where death waited around every corner and somehow kept breathing anyway. When they got hurt, it was catastrophic. Bodies pushed beyond human limits finally breaking. She'd treated dozens of special operations soldiers, but SEAL cases always carried extra weight. The helicopter touched down in a cloud of dust. Sarah grabbed her medical bag, jumped. The ground hit hard under her boots. Immediately she spotted them, cluster of camouflaged figures near a damaged Humvee. The smell reached her first. Acrid, burning metal, explosives, the signature of violence. 3 SEALs were down. 2 conscious but shaken, cuts across their faces, possible concussions from the way they held themselves. The third was unconscious, blood seeping through his tactical vest, dark, too much. Sarah's practiced I took it all in, assessed, prioritized, moved. "Talk to me," she called out to the team leader, a grizzled master chief with eyes that had seen too much. IED took out our lead vehicle. He gestured to the unconscious SEAL. Johnson here took the worst of it. Rodriguez and Martinez are banged up but mobile. Sarah went to work immediately, checking vital signs, starting an IV line. Johnson's pulse was weak but steady, signs of internal bleeding. This was going to be a race against time. Her hands moved with muscle memory. Find the vein, secure the line, apply pressure, keep him alive. But something was wrong. Not with Johnson, with them. Normally SEAL teams were professional but talkative during medical emergencies, offering information, asking pointed questions about treatment, making dark jokes to cut the tension. This group was different. They stood in a tight circle around her, watching every move she made, an intensity that went beyond normal concern for a wounded teammate. It made her skin crawl. "We need to get him airlifted immediately," Sarah announced, applying pressure to a particularly nasty wound on Johnson's abdomen. "He's got internal bleeding that needs surgical intervention." The team leader nodded, but didn't move. None of them moved. They just kept staring at her with expressions she couldn't quite read. It wasn't suspicion exactly, but it wasn't normal concern either. There was something almost reverent in their posture, like they were looking at something they couldn't quite believe. Sarah looked up from her patient, confused, unsettled. "I need one of you to help me get him to the helicopter. Every second counts here." Still they hesitated. The team leader, whose name tape read Morrison, finally stepped forward, but his movements were careful, almost hesitant, as if he were approaching someone he wasn't sure he should touch. "Ma'am," Morrison said quietly, "we'll help however you need, just tell us what to do." The formality in his voice struck her as odd. SEALs weren't known for excessive politeness, especially in emergency situations. They were direct, efficient, focused on the mission. This deference was completely out of character. Sarah shook off her confusion, focused on the immediate need. "Rodriguez, I need you to hold this IV bag steady. Martinez, help me lift him onto the stretcher." They moved like they were handling precious cargo, their usual military efficiency replaced by an almost ceremonial carefulness. Sarah noticed their hands were shaking slightly as they helped transfer Johnson to the stretcher. Shaking. Navy SEALs with hands that trembled. What the hell was going on? During the helicopter ride back to base, Sarah monitored Johnson's condition while stealing glances at the other 2 SEALs. Rodriguez kept looking at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention. Martinez seemed to be studying her face with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "Have we worked together before?" Sarah finally asked, raising her voice over the helicopter noise. Rodriguez and Martinez exchanged a quick look. Something passed between them, something that made Sarah's chest tighten. Rodriguez shook his head. "No, ma'am, first time." But the way he said it suggested there was more to the story, much more. Sarah had been around military personnel long enough to recognize when someone was holding back information. These men knew something about her, something she didn't understand, something that made them look at her like she was a ghost. Johnson's condition stabilized during the flight. Sarah allowed herself a moment to process the strange encounter. She'd worked with dozens of SEAL teams during her deployment. They were always professional, but this level of deference was unprecedented. Most special operations soldiers treated medical personnel with respect but maintained their characteristic confidence and directness. As they approached the base, Sarah caught Martinez whispering something to Rodriguez. She only caught a few words, but they made her blood run cold. "Can't be. Thought she was dead." The helicopter touched down at the base medical facility. Sarah immediately shifted back into crisis mode. Johnson needed emergency surgery. She had a job to do. But as the medical team wheeled him into the operating room, she noticed Morrison approaching her with a strange expression on his face. "Doc," he said quietly, "I know this might sound weird, but could I ask you something personal?" Sarah was already scrubbing in for surgery, but something in his tone made her pause. "What is it?" Morrison seemed to struggle with the words, like he was trying to solve a puzzle that shouldn't exist. "Your last name, is it really Chen?" The question caught her completely off guard. "Yes, of course it is. Why would you ask that?" Morrison stared at her for a long moment, as if he were seeing a ghost. "And you've never served in the military?" "Never," Sarah replied firmly. "I'm a civilian contractor. I've been quite clear about that since I arrived." Morrison nodded slowly, but his expression remained troubled. "Right, of course. Sorry, Doc, it's been a long day." As Morrison walked away, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she had just stepped into something much bigger than a routine medical evacuation. The way the SEALs had reacted to her, their strange questions, the whispered comments about someone being dead, all of it pointed to a mystery she didn't understand. She pushed the thoughts aside as she entered the operating room. Johnson needed her full attention. Speculation would have to wait. But even as she worked to save the wounded SEAL's life, she couldn't forget the look in Morrison's eyes when he asked about her name. Something was very wrong. And Sarah had the unsettling feeling that she was at the center of it. The operating room doors swung open 3 hours later. Sarah emerged exhausted but satisfied. Johnson would live. The surgery had been complicated. Removal of shrapnel from his liver, repair of damaged intestines, but his vital signs were stable. The bleeding had stopped. Another life pulled back from the edge. She found Morrison and his team in the waiting area, still in their combat gear despite regulations requiring them to clean up after missions. They stood as soon as they saw her, faces tense with anticipation. "He's going to be fine," Sarah announced, pulling off her surgical cap. "The next 24 hours are critical, but he should make a full recovery." The relief on their faces was immediate, profound. Rodriguez actually stumbled backward, as if the good news had physically impacted him. Martinez closed his eyes and whispered what sounded like a prayer. Morrison stepped forward, his expression a mixture of gratitude and something else Sarah couldn't identify. "Thank you, Doc, really. You saved his life." "It's my job," Sarah replied simply. But she was struck again by the intensity of their reaction. Yes, SEALs cared deeply about their teammates. Brotherhood ran deeper than blood in special operations. But this felt different, more personal, like she hadn't just saved a teammate, like she'd saved something they thought they'd lost forever. Morrison seemed to wrestle with himself for a moment. Then he made a decision. "Doc, can we talk? Somewhere private." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Whatever this was, it was coming now. "There's a consultation room down the hall." The four of them walked in silence. Morrison, Rodriguez, Martinez, and Sarah, who suddenly felt like she was walking towards something that would change everything. The consultation room was small, sterile, a table and a few chairs. Morrison closed the door carefully. The click of the lock seemed unnaturally loud. "What's this about?" Sarah asked, though part of her wasn't sure she wanted to know. Morrison pulled out his phone, scrolled through something, then turned the screen toward her. "Does this person look familiar to you?" Sarah looked at the photo, and her world tilted. It was her. Not just someone who looked like her same face, same build, same dark hair, but in military fatigues, combat gear, a weapon slung across her chest, standing with a group of soldiers, smiling, confident, alive in a way that Sarah had never felt. "I don't understand," Sarah whispered. "Her name was Elena Vasquez," Morrison said quietly, "combat medic, one of the best we ever worked with. She served with us in Syria 3 years ago." He paused. "She was killed in action, or at least that's what we were told." Sarah couldn't stop staring at the photo. The woman in the image looked exactly like her. Not similar, not close, exactly. "This has to be a mistake," Sarah said, but her voice sounded hollow, unconvincing. "I've never been in the military, I've never been to Syria, I'm a doctor from Seattle. I went to medical school at Johns Hopkins. I have memories, a life, a past." Rodriguez stepped forward. "What's your earliest clear memory, Doc?" Sarah opened her mouth to answer, then stopped. What was her earliest clear memory? She tried to think back. Childhood, family, growing up, but everything before about 3 years ago felt fuzzy, like a photograph left too long in the sun, faded, indistinct. She'd always attributed it to stress, to the long hours in medical school, to exhaustion. But now, looking at that photo, doubt crept in like ice water through her veins. "I remember medical school," she said slowly. "I remember my residency, my family." "Do you remember them?" Martinez asked gently. "Or do you remember knowing about them?" The question hit like a punch to the gut. Sarah tried to picture her parents' faces, her childhood home, her first day of school, but the images wouldn't come. Not real memories, just facts, information, things she knew but hadn't experienced. Her hands started to shake. "This doesn't make sense," she said. "People don't just forget their entire lives. That's not how memory works." Morrison's face was grave. "It is if someone makes you forget." "What are you talking about?" "Elena Vasquez was working on something when she died," Morrison explained. "Or when we thought she died. She discovered evidence of military corruption, high-level stuff, people trafficking intelligence to hostile foreign governments. She was going to blow the whistle, and then there was an explosion. A mission gone wrong. We were told she didn't survive." Sarah's mind raced. "But if I'm her, if I'm Elena, why wouldn't I remember? Why would I think I'm someone else?" "Because someone with serious resources wanted you to disappear," Rodriguez said. "Someone who couldn't afford to have you testify. Someone who could make your identity vanish and create a new one in its place." "But my credentials," Sarah protested. "My medical license, my education, that's all real. I've used it. It's been verified." "And it would have cost millions to fabricate that level of documentation," Morrison agreed. "But when you're covering up treason, protecting billion-dollar corruption schemes, millions is pocket change." Sarah sank into a chair. Her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. This couldn't be real. It was insane. People didn't just have their identities rewritten. This was the stuff of movies, fiction, not reality. "But that photo, that face, her face." "I need proof," Sarah said. "More than just a photograph, I need something concrete." Martinez pulled out a folder, set it on the table. "We've been investigating since we saw you today, making calls, checking records." He opened the folder. "Dr. Sarah Chen's credentials are real, but they only go back 34 months. Before that, nothing. No college applications, no high school records, no birth certificate on file with the state of Washington." Sarah's breath came shorter. Elena Vasquez, on the other hand, has a complete paper trail. Born in Texas, raised in Colorado, joined the Army at 18, became a combat medic, served with distinction, received a Silver Star for actions in Syria. Morrison tapped the folder. "And she had a brother, Dr. James Chen, a trauma surgeon who was killed in a car accident 3 years ago, right around the time Elena supposedly died." The room spun. "They used her brother's name," Sarah whispered. "They gave me her brother's identity, made me think I was his sister." "It's perfect cover," Rodriguez said. "Anyone who digs finds a real person with real credentials. They just transferred them to you, made you believe you inherited his legacy, his career, his life." Sarah looked down at her hands. Surgeons' hands, steady, skilled. Had these hands held weapons? Had they patched wounds on battlefields? Had they belonged to someone else entirely? "If this is true," she said slowly, "if I really am Elena Vasquez, then someone went to extraordinary lengths to erase me. Someone powerful, someone who's still out there." Morrison nodded. "Which means when they find out you're alive and working in an active combat zone, they're going to come for you." "Then what do I do?" "You remember," Morrison said firmly. "You remember who you really are, and you finish what you started 3 years ago." Sarah looked up at him, at these three men who'd risked everything to tell her the truth. "How? How do I remember a life that was stolen from me?" "We help you," Martinez said simply. "We were there. We remember what you don't, and together we figure out who did this to you and why." Sarah Chen felt herself fracturing, splitting, everything she thought she knew crumbling like sand. But underneath that fear, something else stirred, something fierce, something that had been sleeping for 3 years. A voice that whispered, "Remember." The next 72 hours passed in a haze of confusion and revelation. Morrison and his team worked carefully, quietly. They knew whoever had erased Elena Vasquez was watching, waiting, so they moved in shadows, shared information in encrypted messages, met in places where surveillance couldn't follow. Sarah went through the motions of her regular duties, treating patients, running surgeries, maintaining the facade of Dr. Sarah Chen, civilian contractor, but inside she was falling apart. Every night Morrison brought her something new, a photograph, a mission report, a letter Elena had written, pieces of a life she should have remembered but didn't. "This is from the Syria deployment," Morrison said one evening, showing her a photo of Elena with a group of soldiers. "That's you in the middle. You just saved 3 Marines under heavy fire, ran through an ambush zone with nothing but a medical bag. We called you Ghost because you moved like smoke through the battlefield." Sarah stared at the photo. The woman looked fearless, confident, nothing like the person Sarah saw in the mirror each morning. "I don't feel like a ghost," Sarah said quietly. "That's because they took it from you," Rodriguez replied. "They took your courage, your memories, your identity. But Ghost, those things aren't gone. They're just buried." Ghost. The name resonated somehow, like a frequency she'd forgotten how to hear. "Tell me about the corruption," Sarah said. "What did Elena find?" Martinez pulled out a classified document, heavily redacted. "You were treating a wounded intelligence officer. He was delirious from blood loss. Started talking about payments, about information being sold to hostile governments, about a network inside the Pentagon that was trafficking classified intelligence. And Elena investigated." "You documented everything," Morrison said. "Recorded conversations, copied files. You were building a case, planning to take it to Congress. And then on your last mission there was an explosion. We were told you died, but now we know better." Sarah's hands clenched. They faked my death, erased my identity, turned me into someone else. Someone safe, Rodriguez added. Someone who couldn't testify, who couldn't remember, who would never be a threat again. The anger that had been building in Sarah finally broke through. Who did this? We don't know yet, Morrison admitted. But we're getting closer. We've been tracking financial records, following paper trails. Someone with access to military intelligence databases and civilian identity systems. Someone with the power to make a decorated combat medic disappear and replace her with a fake doctor. Except I'm not fake, Sarah said. The medical knowledge is real. The skills are real. Because Elena Vasquez was a trained combat medic, Martinez explained. They didn't create your medical knowledge. They just redirected it, gave you a different framework to understand what you already knew. Sarah thought about that, about the way surgery felt natural to her, the way she moved in emergency situations with instinct rather than thought, skills that should have taken years to develop but felt like breathing. How do we prove any of this? She asked. We need the evidence Elena gathered, Morrison said. 3 years ago, you told us you had insurance, a fail-safe, somewhere you'd hidden proof of the corruption in case anything happened to you. Sarah's heart sank, but I don't remember where. Then we make you remember. Over the following days, they tried everything, showed her photos of places she'd been, missions she'd run, people she'd saved. They walked her through operations step by step, hoping something would trigger a memory. Nothing worked. Sarah could see the frustration building in Morrison and his team. They were running out of time. Whoever had erased Elena was good at their job. Too good. The memories were locked away somewhere Sarah couldn't reach. Until one night, Sarah woke up screaming. She'd been dreaming. Not the vague, formless dreams of Sarah Chen, but something vivid, real, a memory forcing its way to the surface. She was in Syria, desert heat, the smell of cordite, a wounded officer on a stretcher, blood everywhere. He was delirious, talking, and she was listening, recording, on a device hidden in her medical kit. The money goes through offshore accounts, the officer mumbled. Peterson handles the transfers. He's the liaison. He's the one selling us out. And Elena had looked up, seen someone watching, realized she'd been caught. Sarah bolted upright in bed, gasping. She remembered. Not everything, but enough. The evidence wasn't in Syria. It was here, in Afghanistan, hidden in a place only Elena would think to look. Sarah grabbed her phone, called Morrison. I know where it is. Within an hour, they were moving. Sarah led them to the base medical facility, past security, into the supply room where surgical equipment was stored. She went to a specific shelf, reached behind a box of IV bags, found the seam in the wall she somehow knew would be there, and pulled out a waterproof pouch. Inside was a thumb drive, encrypted, containing years of investigation, proof of corruption that had cost Elena Vasquez everything. This is it, Sarah whispered. This is what they tried to bury. Morrison took the drive carefully. We need to get this to the right people, but we have to be careful. Whoever did this to you has resources, connections. If we go to the wrong person, we're all dead. Sarah looked at the drive in his hands, then at the 3 SEALs who'd risked everything to help her remember. Then we don't go to people, she said quietly. We go public, we release everything, make it impossible to cover up. Rodriguez smiled. Now you sound like Ghost. For the first time in 3 years, Sarah Chen smiled back, not as Sarah Chen, but as someone else. Someone who didn't forget her oath, even when she forgot everything else. They had 48 hours before everything changed. Morrison worked his contacts, found a journalist who could be trusted, someone who'd built a career on exposing military corruption, someone who wouldn't be intimidated or bought off. The meeting was set for a location off base, neutral ground, somewhere they could hand over the evidence and disappear before anyone realized what they'd done. But Sarah knew it wouldn't be that simple. She'd started having more memories, fragments, pieces of Alina Vasquez bleeding through the facade of Sarah Chen, and those memories told her something important. Whoever had erased her was watching, always watching. "They'll know," she told Morrison the night before the handoff. "The moment we leave this base with that drive, they'll know." "Then we move fast," Morrison replied. "Get the evidence out, scatter before they can stop us." But Sarah shook her head. She was remembering things now. How Alina thought, how she planned, how she understood that sometimes the only way to win was to draw the enemy into the open. "We don't run," Sarah said. "We make them come to us." Martinez looked at her with new respect. "You want to use yourself as bait. They think I'm broken, that I'll never remember, that Dr. Sarah Chen is too scared, too confused to be a threat." Sarah's eyes hardened. "Let them keep thinking that. Let them get close, and then we take them down." Rodriguez grinned. "Ghost is back." They planned carefully. Morrison would take the encrypted drive off base, make contact with the journalist, ensure the evidence got published regardless of what happened. Sarah would stay behind, continue her duties as Dr. Chen, wait for the people who destroyed Alina Vasquez to make their move. The trap was set. It didn't take long. 2 days after Morrison left, Sarah received orders. She was being reassigned, effective immediately. A medical emergency at a forward operating base. Critical casualties. They needed her expertise. But the orders didn't come through proper channels. They came from someone trying to look official, trying to get her isolated, alone. Sarah packed her medical gear, told no one where she was going, boarded the helicopter that would take her to what should have been her death. Except this time, she knew what was waiting. The helicopter touched down at an abandoned outpost. No casualties, no medical emergency, just 3 men in civilian clothes, armed, professional, the kind of contractors who did work governments couldn't acknowledge. "Dr. Chen," one of them said as she stepped off the helicopter, "we need to talk." Sarah looked at them calmly. "About what?" "About who you really are." "I'm a doctor," Sarah replied. "A civilian contractor. Is there some problem with my credentials?" The lead contractor smiled. It wasn't friendly. "We both know that's not true. We know you've been meeting with Navy SEALs. We know you've been asking questions. And we know you found something that doesn't belong to you." Sarah felt her pulse quicken, but Alina's training held. "Stay calm, don't show fear." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Alina Vasquez should have stayed dead," the contractor said. "We gave you a new life, a clean slate. You should have been grateful." "So it's true," Sarah said quietly. "You erased me." "We saved you," the contractor corrected. "The people you were investigating would have killed you slowly, painfully. We gave you mercy, a chance to start over. By stealing everything I was. By giving you peace." The contractor's face hardened. "But you couldn't leave well enough alone. You had to remember, had to dig, and now you're a problem again." Sarah looked at the 3 armed men, at the helicopter pilot who was clearly with them, at the desert stretching endlessly in every direction. She was alone, isolated, exactly where they wanted her. "So what now?" she asked. "You kill me, make me disappear again." "We tie up loose ends," the contractor said. "You, the SEALs who helped you, the evidence you think you found, all of it goes away, permanently." Sarah nodded slowly. "There's just one problem with your plan." "What's that?" "You assume I came here alone." The contractor's expression flickered, just for a second, doubt. And in that second, Sarah moved. Alina's training took over. Muscle memory she didn't know she had, she dropped, rolled, came up with the medical kit in her hands, not a weapon, but inside that kit was a scalpel, small, sharp, precise. The contractor reached for his gun, too slow. Sarah was already inside his guard. The scalpel flashed, not to kill, to disable, a cut across the wrist, severing tendons. The gun clattered to the ground. The other two contractors drew their weapons, but they hesitated, confused by the sudden transformation, the mild-mannered doctor moving like a trained operative. And in that hesitation, Morrison's team emerged from the desert. They'd been there all along, waiting, watching, ready. The firefight was brief, professional. Morrison and his SEALs moved with precision. The contractors didn't stand a chance. When it was over, Sarah stood in the Afghan dust, breathing hard, the scalpel still in her hand, blood on her scrubs, not a doctor anymore, not quite. Something else. Morrison approached carefully. "You good, Ghost?" Sarah looked down at her hands, trembling now, the adrenaline fatting. "I remember," she whispered. "I remember all of it." And she did. The memories had broken through during the fight. Syria, the investigation, the explosion that should have killed her, waking up in a hospital with no memory, being told she was Sarah Chen, believing it because she had nothing else to believe. "They almost won," Sarah said quietly. "But they didn't," Rodriguez replied. Martinez was on the radio, calling for extraction, coordinating with the journalist Morrison had contacted, making sure the evidence got published before anyone could stop it. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. Morrison looked at her seriously. "Now we finish it. The evidence goes public. The people who did this to you go to prison, and you decide who you want to be." Sarah looked at the contractors, at the blood in the sand, at the helicopter waiting to take her away from this place. "I want to be both," she said finally. "Sarah Chen taught me compassion, patience, how to heal, but Elena Vasquez taught me strength, how to fight, how to protect people who can't protect themselves." She looked at Morrison. "I don't want to lose either of them." "Then don't," Morrison said simply. "You're not one or the other, you're both, and that makes you stronger than they ever realized." As they boarded the helicopter, Sarah felt something shift inside her. The two identities she'd been fighting to reconcile finally merging, not seamlessly, not perfectly, but real. She was Dr. Sarah Chen, healer and surgeon. She was Sergeant Elena Vasquez, warrior and protector. She was Ghost, the medic who never left anyone behind. And she was done running. The evidence went public 6 hours later. Morrison's journalist contact published everything. Names, dates, financial records, proof of military corruption reaching into the highest levels of government. Within hours it was everywhere. News networks, social media, congressional committees demanding investigations. There was no covering it up this time. Sarah watched it unfold from a safe house in Kabul. Morrison and his team stood guard while the world discovered what Elena Vasquez had died trying to expose. Except she hadn't died. She'd been erased, buried, turned into someone else. But now she was back. "They're already making arrests," Rodriguez reported, watching his phone. "Pentagon officials, congressional staffers, private contractors. The whole network is collapsing." "Good," Sarah said quietly. But she felt hollow, vindicated, yes, but also adrift. For 3 years she'd been Dr. Sarah Chen, had lived that life, believed in it, and now she knew it was all fabricated, a cover story to keep her compliant and quiet. "What are you thinking?" Morrison asked. Sarah looked at him, this man who'd risked everything to give her back her truth. "I'm thinking I don't know who I am anymore." "You're the woman who saved Johnson's life on that battlefield," Morrison said. "You're the medic who ran through gunfire in Syria to pull Marines to safety. You're the doctor who spent 8 months in this desert saving lives." He met her eyes. "The name doesn't matter. The memories don't change who you are at your core." "But which memories are real?" Sarah asked. "Did I really go to Johns Hopkins? Did I have a family in Seattle? Or was all of that just programming, fake history implanted to make me believe I was someone I'm not?" Martinez spoke up. "Some of it was real. The medical training, the skills, they couldn't fabricate that. They just redirected it, gave you a different origin story. So I'm a real doctor built on a fake past. You're a real person, Rodriguez said firmly, with real skills, real compassion, real strength. They tried to bury Alina Vasquez, but she was still in there, still fighting, still trying to protect people. Sarah thought about that, about the way she'd moved when the contractors attacked, how the training had come back without thinking, how Alina's instincts had saved her life. They didn't erase me, she said slowly. They just made me forget, but Alina was always there, waiting. Morrison nodded. And now you remember, so what do you want to do? Sarah stood, walked to the window. Outside, Kabul was dark, but somewhere out there people were being arrested. A corruption network was crumbling. Justice was finally being served. Because Alina Vasquez had never stopped fighting, even when she didn't remember her own name. I want to testify, Sarah said. When they bring these people to trial, I want to look them in the eye and tell them they failed. They tried to break me, tried to make me disappear, but I'm still here. That's dangerous, Morrison warned. There are still people out there who want you dead, people who have resources, connections. Let them come, Sarah said, and she meant it. I'm not running anymore, I'm not hiding. I'm Alina Vasquez, and I'm done being afraid. Martinez grinned. There's the ghost we know. Over the following weeks, Sarah gave her testimony, first to military investigators, then to congressional committees, then to federal prosecutors building cases against the dozen officials who'd been part of the corruption network. She told them everything, about the wounded officer in Syria who'd revealed the conspiracy, about documenting the evidence, about the explosion that should have killed her, about waking up as someone else. They didn't just steal my identity, Sarah told the congressional committee. They stole my purpose, my memories, my right to choose who I wanted to be. She paused. But they couldn't steal what I knew, what I felt, what I believed in. The chairman of the committee leaned forward. What do you believe in, Sergeant Vasquez? Sarah looked at Morrison, Rodriguez, and Martinez sitting in the audience, men who'd never stopped believing in her, even when she'd forgotten herself. I believe in protecting people who can't protect themselves, she said quietly. I believe in standing up for what's right, even when it costs everything. I believe in the oath I took, to defend, to serve, to never leave anyone behind. And what are your plans now? Sarah smiled. I'm going to keep doing what I've always done, taking care of people who need help, just with a clearer understanding of where that calling comes from. After the hearing, reporters swarmed. Questions shouted from every direction, but Sarah walked through them calmly, head high, not as Dr. Chen, not as Sergeant Vasquez, but as someone who'd survived the impossible and emerged stronger. Morrison caught up with her outside. You handled that well. I remembered something during the testimony, Sarah said. Something Alina knew, something Sarah learned. What's that? Dignity doesn't need validation, Sarah said quietly. It doesn't need applause or recognition, it just needs truth. She looked at him. They tried to take that from me, my truth, my dignity, but it was always there, even when I couldn't remember it. Rodriguez handed her a small package, from the team. Sarah unwrapped it. Inside was a medical kit, custom modifications, improvements that reflected techniques she developed both as Alina and as Sarah, and a small plaque that read, for Alina Ghost Vasquez, the best combat medic who never forgot her oath, even when she forgot everything else. Sarah felt tears threatening, but they were good tears, the kind that came from finally understanding she didn't have to choose between her identities. Thank you, she said, for everything, for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself. Martinez stepped forward. Ghost, we have one more thing. He handed her an official document. Sarah opened it. Orders reassigning her to a new position. Medical liaison for a joint task force dedicated to investigating military corruption and protecting whistleblowers. It's voluntary, Morrison explained. but we thought you might be interested in making sure what happened to you never happens to anyone else." Sarah looked at the orders, then at the three men who'd risked their careers and lives to help her remember who she was. "I accept, but on one condition." "What's that?" "You three are assigned to the task force as well. If we're going to do this, we do it together." Morrison grinned, extended his hand. "Deal, but fair warning. This time when we go into hostile territory, we're going after people in three-piece suits instead of military uniforms." Sarah shook his hand firmly. "Good. I've always been better at treating wounded egos than gunshot wounds." As they walked through the Washington afternoon, Sarah felt the last pieces of her identity puzzle falling into place. She was Elena Vasquez, Silver Star recipient, combat veteran. She was Sarah Chen, compassionate doctor, healer. She was Ghost, the medic who never left anyone behind. But most importantly, she was someone who'd learned that identity wasn't about what you remembered or what others told you about yourself. It was about the choices you made and the people you chose to stand with when those choices mattered most. 18 months later, Elena Vasquez stood in a small clinic in the mountains of Colorado. The building was modest, nothing fancy, but it had everything she needed: medical equipment, supplies, space to treat people who needed help but couldn't afford the kind of care cities offered. Outside the window, snow fell gently on pine trees. The mountains stretched endlessly, peaceful, quiet home. But Elena wasn't alone. Morrison, Rodriguez, and Martinez were nearby, working the task force, investigating, protecting, making sure the corruption they'd exposed stayed buried. They visited often, checked in, reminded her she had people who had her back. Always. The door chimed. Elena looked up from her paperwork. A young woman entered, nervous, bruised, the kind of injuries that didn't come from accidents. "Can I help you?" Elena asked gently. "I heard you help people," the woman said quietly. "People who need to disappear, start over." Elena's chest tightened. She knew that desperation, that need to escape a life that had become unbearable. "I can help," Elena said, "but not by making you disappear, by giving you the tools to fight back, to reclaim who you are." The woman looked surprised. "I don't want to fight, I just want to be safe." "Safety isn't about running," Elena said softly. "It's about finding your strength, your voice, your dignity." She thought about Morrison's words 18 months ago, about how dignity didn't speak. It simply acted. "Come in," Elena said. "Let me take care of those injuries, and then we'll talk about what comes next." As the woman sat down, Elena felt that familiar sense of purpose. The same purpose that had driven Elena Vasquez in Syria. The same compassion that had defined Sarah Chen in Afghanistan. She was both, she was neither, she was herself. And she was finally free. That evening, after her last patient left, Elena sat on the clinic's porch, watched the sun set over the mountains, felt the cold air on her face. Her phone buzzed, text from Morrison. "Just wrapped another case, 3 more arrests, how's civilian life treating you?" Elena smiled, typed back. "Not so civilian, helped someone today, same mission, different battlefield." "That's our Ghost, never stops fighting." Elena put her phone down, looked out at the mountains again. Some wounds could only heal when truth was allowed to surface. Some identities could only be whole when all the broken pieces were acknowledged and accepted as part of a larger, stronger whole. She'd learned both lessons the hard way. Now she was ready to help others learn them too. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.